When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite, looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, their profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, Beyond the Headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today.
Hey wrestling fans, this is Dan Murphy, formerly of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, along with
Brian Young, and we co-authored The Wrestler's Wrestler.
The Wrestlers Wrestlers, the masters of the craft of professional wrestling, and you're listening to Crazy
Train Radio.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, the Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this next guest we've had on before because of some little project that's over here called The Wrestler's Wrestler. Ah, right here, above Bret Hart. So, how ironic. But we are going to do a little deep dive back to a project that came out called The Sister of the Squared Circle. Why am I going back? And that is because there is a movie that came out last night officially, but obviously most people think of Friday releases, and that being Queen of the Ring. So we got the author of this lovely book and Wrestler's Wrestler with some Jay Brown that co-authored with him. But we got Dan Murphy on the line. Dan, how the hell are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be back.
Right on. And that Jay Brown that I may have been making fun of, and I know I'll never hear the end of it, was Daniel's co-author on The Wrestler's Wrestler, Mr. Brian Young. Brian, how you feeling?
I'm here.
So how's that senior citizen center going for you so far living there, Brian?
Oh, it's going wonderful.
A little inside rib there, but I want to start off with the movie because Dan has been such a champion for women's wrestling. Have you seen the movie, and is it the right time for a project on Mildred Burke to come out at this point?
I haven't seen it yet. I expect to see it this weekend. And yeah, it's definitely the right time. Mildred Burke is a fascinating story, and but it's not not necessarily the feel good story that you may expect from a lot of these. And I think that right now you mentioned the time and whether the time is right. I think it is with, say, the Iron Claw, the Von Erichs movie that came out last year. That was a movie that took a kind of what would be maybe an inspiring story traditionally of brothers who all went on to fame and fortune. But it also showed all of the terrible tragedies that befell that family through the years. And it did it in a kind of nuanced, if not entirely historically accurate way, a little bit condensed. And it did well. I think that it found an audience. A lot of people liked it. I enjoyed it. The Mildred Burke story follows that same arc. She went to the heights. She was one of the highest paid athletes, let alone one of the highest paid female athletes of the era. And she experienced incredible success, more so than a 17-year-old single mom working in a diner in Coffeyville, Kansas, had any right to ever expect with her life. However, that life was also marred by tragedy and sadness and a lot of heartbreak, really, throughout the entire course of her life. Whether or not this movie can fit all of it into that hour and a half, 2 hour runtime, I'm not sure. But I'm very hopeful, and I think that the time, like you said, is right for the story.
So I want to, before I continue, because I do want to pepper questions within the time that we have, but I joked saying that Mr. Young had bribed me to be here. But all kidding aside, Mr. Young wanted to put something, I guess, officially on the record. So, Brian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I crawled out of my sick bed to do this, which is because I don't get to talk to Danny nearly enough, even though we live in the same city, but we're both very incredibly busy people. So it's always good to talk to Dan, and we have to get together very soon. But I just wanted the public to know that, A, they should go get Sisterhood of the Squared Circle. The book is incredible. Incredibly timely now for this movie to come out. I think the book's going to show a big resurgence once this movie's a hit, because the movie's geared to become a hit. And Dan Murphy is, it's going to sound so misogynistic for a guy to say this about another guy, but the truth of the matter is Dan Murphy is the best friend women's wrestling has ever had.
No, come on.
I don't think people realize how important you were behind the scenes to legitimizing it. For years and years, women's wrestling was thought of as nothing more than a sideshow. And then just TNA, diva searches, and no one was giving credit to the talent these women had and what they were doing in the business and the struggles and how hard they worked. The only person who was doing that, and it was on a national level, was Dan Murphy at Pro Wrestling Illustrated. He was giving them the credit. He created the Women's 100 that no one had ever thought of doing. And Dan not only did it himself, because no one else there would work on it. He befriended all these women who were up and coming, helping them get auditions with shows. I know this personally. Dan's not going to say this stuff publicly. He would drive around the country taking these girls to auditions for companies. He, would help out in any way possible. And there is not one woman in the business who doesn't know and respect him and will not say nothing but good things about him. And in the wrestling business, to find someone that no one says anything bad about. Everything is positive, and you can ask any woman in the business from biggest to the smallest now. They will all say something incredibly positive about Dan Murphy. Because if it wasn't for him, women's wrestling would probably still remain a sideshow instead of probably the most exciting aspect of the business today. And that's all Dan. And that's from the heart. That's not me just buttering up. I've known Dan for years, and I've told him this in private, and I think it's time people say it to him in public.
Right on.
I'm stunned, but I appreciate that, Brian. I mean, we can discuss it as much as you like, but I do want to state for the record, too, that I did not expect that and did not pay Brian for the endorsement. But thank you.
But he paid me to.
Oh, there we go.
The
as long as some money changed hands. It's wrestling after all, right?
That's
exactly. Right. So, Brian, I know you're not feeling good. If you want to go back to deathbed, you can.
You will rest in peace.
Well, I'm going to listen in. I love to hear Danny talk, so I will continue to. I'll probably be quiet.
Sounds good. And he's asked to join it as well. His check bounced, though, unfortunately, because he knows Dan and knows a lot of the historical women as well. Mike Lano, how are you, Mike?
Hey, everybody. I hope Brian gets well. Dan, of course, premier expert. I'm not sure what you guys discussed yet, but in our LA market this morning, the female lead of Queen of the Ring was on both our CW affiliate, Channel 5, and our Channel 11, which I think is Fox. So she did double duty. Also on Channel 5, Oba Femi had a long segment too, just simply to promote the show and NXT show. And of course, they're re-airing it tonight because of the Trump coverage and rebuttals. It cost us the first half hour of NXT on Tuesday night. But I'm not sure what you guys talked about. Let me throw this out to everybody, specifically Dan. I worry when I looked at this first, and I think, have all they done, to your knowledge, Dan, is a New York City red carpet premiere last night or the night before, whenever it was. They were supposed to have done an LA one. I would have liked to have gone to, because where it's showing here in theaters in LA and Orange County, it's like not on all day. They just have like, depending on the theater, one airing at night or two airings at most, like at 8 and 10 o'clock, and that's it. But I was a little, so it's kind of a multi-part question, Dan. I was worried at first that it looked like they cast out of Euphoria or Gossip Girl, all these pretty young things, and they're trying to portray gritty, hooker shooter type female theses in June Byers and obviously Mildred Burke. But then, of course, you may want that to attract younger people to even be interested in the subject matter. So maybe it's a smart thing, and until I see it, we'll have to go by that. I just hope it's, more Jeff Lean than sort of adaptation type stuff.
Absolutely.
And Dan, have you seen the movie?
I have not seen the movie yet. We kind of mentioned that to begin. I do hope to see it this weekend. And yeah, Jeff Lean, the author of Queen of the Ring, the real source material for that movie and the biography of Mildred Burke, fantastic book, highly recommended. My understanding is that it is, like you said, Dr. Mike, it's a limited theatrical release. And at first, I didn't know if it would ever see the light of day. I remember at the Cauliflower Alley Club several years back, at one point Jim Ross was attached to this. He was really kind of backing this, and he was involved. I don't know how that all worked out, but I remember this being discussed 7-8 years ago, maybe. And it was one of those, it just seemed like one of those pie in the sky things that, I don't know, a movie about Mildred Burke. I mean, who's going to see that? It's so niche, it's so whatever. But like I was mentioning right before you came on, the Von Erichs movie last year, the Iron Claw, I think that was also kind of a niche movie that found its audience. And I think that in a lot of ways paved the way for this movie. But like to your point about the casting, with the Iron Claw movie, I don't think the casting was particularly good. I mean, Zac Efron is Kevin Von Erich, and the guy from The Bear is Carrie. And they don't physically fit the bill really, and to the point of distraction for a lot of us, I'm sure, definitely for me. But I think that they did a great job with the story, as truncated as it was to fit it within the runtime. So I think my expectation and my hope is that the Queen of the Ring movie will be the same way. That the casting is the casting. Hollywood will cast the way that they do, but I think the story is strong enough to carry through that with the willing suspension of disbelief.
And one thing, the female lead, when she was talking, just very quickly, was educated on it, but it hit me, being a purist like you, when she said, well, Mildred and Billy Wolfe went on to create this beautiful thing together. And I'm just thinking in the back of my head, not if you know Billy Wolfe and the trauma caused to both Mildred and June and stuff. But putting that aside, I'm thrilled, as probably a lot of folks are. And maybe this will bring even more people. You know how it's mainstream, like the Cena turn the other night, all over Sports Center and all this mainstream
Even
stuff.
on The Daily Show, yeah, Jon Stewart was talking about it. Yeah,
you're bringing more people into the fold, and so maybe younger people seeing it, and then they'll say, well, gee, Toni Storm Russell's, I want to see her. So I wanted more casting of current female wrestlers, more of the listen to Ashley Flair. She was going to be, she had a role, and then she had to bow out for whatever reason. I mean, there's quite a few female wrestlers, including the one that's sadly not doing anything in AEW that should be, because she's incredible. What an incredible NWA Women's Champion she was. But what are have you guys already gone over some of the...
we're not going to stick on the movie the entire time, Mike.
Okay.
I just want to say, before we go any further, to get Mike out of trouble, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to the show who aren't familiar with wrestling the way all of us are. When he referred to Mildred Burke and the women of her era as hookers, shooters, it was not about sex workers, people. I'm not trying to be funny. There are people out there who will hear you say the word.
We're talking about quality athletes that can pop and break joints and bones.
Yeah, that's what he was trying to say.
Yep. Yeah. Trying to get you out of trouble by saying hooker in this respect is about a legitimate athlete is a hooker, not a prostitute. So for
let me say this about Mildred. I first met her. She, as you guys may know, she was training, she had this school in Southern California, but she led a picket of my overall boss, promoter Mike LaBelle's promotion, for not properly utilizing the women that she had. And when he did, she felt he was paying them crappy wages compared to the few times he used Moolah's female wrestlers. So she had a whole group, and Phil Miller and Theo Ayer and I, the three of us, went and shot that. And that was the first time I got to meet Mildred. And then, of course, I was interested in her school years later, because when I was on the board of Cauliflower Alley in the 90s and beyond with Penny Banner, she finally dragged June Byers there, and she came a couple of times. And I don't know if Dan was going to CAC then. It was when we were still in LA, but man, to learn at the feet of Mildred and later June Byers, what an incredible story. I hope someone does a book and a film just on her. She's very deserving. But
on that point, if I'm not mistaken, and that was before I started attending CAC, I started around 2010, but I've heard that Mildred, when she heard that June Byers is going to be attending, or vice versa, they decided not to go if the other one would be there. Have you ever heard that, Mike?
That one I've not heard, but I did ask Mildred how many their bouts were shoots, and I asked each of them individually about their thoughts on Lillian, and I can't remember if that Lipstick and Dynamite came out. Those three women, the producers, showrunners for that, came and filmed a lot in my studio, because at that time Mae Young was living right near me. She was helping train and an on-air with Woody Farmer's little Northern California wrestling promotion. And they both told me they felt that once these mark females, who are very nice ladies, got involved with with Johnny May and Moolah, the film went down the toilet. Because prior to that, it was Ella Waldeck and Gladys Killam Gillum, obviously Penny Banner, Betty Clark, and some of the folks like that, and Mae Weston, who a lot of folks don't know about. I hope people seeing this film, they'll look up Clara and they'll look up Mae Weston. What a total legend she was, playing all kinds of great characters, including a Ma Barker character, etc. I mean, these were magnificent, William, but at the top in terms of athletes, still in my mind, and probably Dan's, etc. Mildred and June. There's like no peers, unless you bring in some of the Japanese women are so extraordinary, especially particularly the All Japan Women days that I was lucky enough to be over there to shoot. Ringside Minami Toyota, these were sensational. But my Hall of Fame or the Rockwell, the monument, it'd have to have Mildred and June up there as the very first, and everybody would be a lower second or tertiary.
I got a question for Dan. About the impact a film like this is going to have on today's market. You're talking about a Hollywood biopic, like you keep referencing the Von Erich pick, which did so well. It got Oscar nominations and it developed a cult following. But I don't think it brought too many people to the business the way
I don't think it's going to be that direct. I think that what it's doing is it's a little bit more of a slow-moving influence. It's kind of like, it's not like somebody's going to, cinema fans are going to see this new movie for the Von Erichs, and now it's going to make them check out AEW and become viewers of AEW and WWE going forward. I don't think it's going to be that direct. I mean, there'll be some. It's not going to hurt viewership. But I think what it's going to do is just continue to add pro wrestling to the cultural zeitgeist and in a lot of ways unmarginalize it, make it more mainstream. Pro wrestling, we've all seen how it's gone from the 60s, 70s, 80s up until now, where, like Mike had said, it's a little bit more mainstream, and the Daily Show and things like that are kind of mentioning wrestling. The Rock, the biggest star in Hollywood, is still appearing in WWE. It's a lot more normal than it had been. And I think that this will begin to do the same for women's wrestling, which, again, up until really the past 10, 15, maybe less, maybe even 6, 7 years, let alone 10, 15, was a real niche, even within the pro wrestling niche. Women's wrestling was, there was a time where I would tell people, hey, I'm working on my new book. Oh, what's the book about? It's a history of women's pro wrestling. And they'd kind of laugh, or like, "Oh, what are you? You're a pervert?" No, there's a real, incredible history here, right? That was the feedback I was getting in 2015, 2016, and 2017 when the book came out. And then I remember doing signings for that book down at WrestleCon or WrestleFest, one of them, and a couple of young girls, 2 sisters, maybe 12 and 13. They were buying the book to do a book report on for school, and they looked at these women as role models, and this is something I can be and aspire to. And it was very cool to see that change in perception over just a few years. And now we've gotten to this point where Ronda Rousey kind of came in and left, and you see the women main eventing WrestleMania and how big of a star these women are becoming. And it's no longer as tawdry or infantilized, sexualized, both ways, really, as much as it used to be. And I think that this will help kind of change things, continue to change things in that direction. I don't think it's necessarily going to create new wrestling fans, but I think it's going to make a lot more people receptive to the concept of women's pro wrestling than going in.
You got to remember, it's like you said, wrestling is a niche, women's wrestling is an ultra niche. I'm a boxing guy, boxing historian. The same thing happened. Believe it or not, women's boxing is bigger now than it's ever been. You're seeing pay-per-views with women boxers headlining. And 2 things are responsible for that. One, when the Olympics added women's boxing, it legitimized it to amateurs in some respect. But one of the main reasons it started getting respect and even looked at by the Olympic Committee was $1 Million Baby.
Huh?
It was that movie. There's been 1 million boxing movies that didn't have any impact, with the exception of Rocky, which probably brought more kids to the sport in the late 70s than any other movie, any sports history. Most boxing movies just came and went and were for fight fans. That movie somehow resonated and changed the landscape of the women's boxing movement. I was just wondering if you think this something like this could have that cultural impact on young women now, or are we to a point where, like you said, the Daily Show talks about the Cena turn, and it's getting more coverage because everybody knows now wrestling is show business, not sport, and this movie is about a time when it was still portrayed as sport. It's
I think
kind of a
there's that
fine line.
potential. I think there is that potential, but I don't foresee this being as big of a hit as Million Dollar Baby or Rocky. I mean, Rocky was a huge cultural phenomenon, but I think that this is going to be, my perception of it is that it's going to be more. Maybe it's because of the limited release and how long it's been talked about. And I remember seeing the first trailers, I don't know, 8 months back or something along those lines. I seem to think that this is a movie that has been shot and reshot and delayed a few times. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a huge hit. I think it's going to be a very well-reviewed movie that's going to find its audience. And so I think, again, like I said, it'll have an influence, but I don't think it'll be an overwhelming cultural change.
Right on. Well, obviously, check out the movie if you can during the limited release. I think I heard it was going to be on Prime as well and a few other spots. So just, I guess, do that whole Google machine, that's for sure. But obviously, as we have stated, Dan has been a champion for the women's part of the industry for years. Brian mentioned about the PWI 100 and such. And there's a lot of material in the book here, from the Mildred Burke, Billy Wolf, and Mae Young, and all that stuff to current times. But I'm curious to know, why and when did you become a fixture on the female wrestling scene? Because I know you had a lot to do with Shimmer, and there's a story where you helped cheerleader Melissa out for an injury, and Shimmer is more of the wrestler's wrestler, get the book plug in there, for female wrestling, compared to things like, say, Glow or the bra and panties matches we would see in the later 90s and such. So when did you kind of get interjected on that part of the
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned Glow. I happen to have, forgive me for moving my camera, but right here.
And we have friends. I was going to say, we have friends from the Glow.
Oh, absolutely,
Jeannie,
yes. Jeannie is, I helped her write that memoir. I just got a copy from her a couple days ago in the mail. I worked with her for about 4 or 5 years on that. But again, it's a very different thing than what Shimmer was. And you're right. And that's what is so kind of neat about wrestling as a whole, but women's wrestling within that whole. You can be a variety of different things. You can have your Shayna Baszlers, you can have your Hollywood from Glow. They can all fit under that umbrella if it's presented the right way. But to your point about Shimmer, Shimmer was a promotion that Dave Prazak and Allison Danger really kind of created. And Dave deserves, I mean, I really appreciate everything Brian said about what I've contributed. And I'm very glad that that's a perception and thankful for being involved with it. I think that Dave has just done so much himself that really built it. And I don't think women's wrestling would have become what it is now without Shimmer. I became aware of it a couple of years in, maybe a year after it began. Dave started sending me some DVDs so I could cover it for Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And I was watching them present matches where the women were having 12 minutes, 15 minutes or so to really show what they can do. And it wasn't what WWE was doing or what TNA was doing with 3-minute matches. It wasn't just kind of assortment of spots. They were very good matches that built. And every match on the card was a little bit different. And the characters were able to develop. And there was a lot to it. And I made it a point, I have to go and check this out. I have to go to one of these tapings. And sat there all day Saturday, all day Sunday for 4 DVD tapings altogether, 12 hours of wrestling both days. And you'd think, well, man, you watch that much wrestling, women's wrestling, whatever, you got to get tired of it. No, it was amazing. And I became a regular. I started going to as many of the Shimmer shows as I could. Brian mentioned driving. A lot of times I would get a bunch of the girls from Southern Ontario. We'd all carpool down to Chicago and travel together to just have company on the road and reduce costs and do what we needed to do. But it was so great because Dave and Shimmer was presenting wrestling. The women weren't trying to do spots that they couldn't do necessarily. They were trying to tell the stories with the tools that they had available. And that forced everybody looking at this incredible variety of talent that came in from across the world. Some of the Joshis from Japan, some of the Europeans who'd come through, people from all over the US and Canada. Everyone was trying to raise their game. And okay, I can't do the move that this person does. How can we make our match different and stand out? And it led to this incredible growth period for everybody involved with that company. So I think that was really the beginning of what we've seen spill over into WWE and AEW. It all really started there in Berwyn, Illinois with Dave Prazak and Shimmer.
Mike, did you have something else you want to bring up?
Well, I remember Dave Prazak as a kid, and whatever year, you remember, guys, when Ron Skoler they were basically purchased AAA shows. But he had me do advanced PR for the Chicago and at the UIC Pavilion and the New York at what was then still called Felt Forum, where NXT is next week. But Dave Prazak, as a little kid, was coming up because I was honoring. I asked Ron Skoler if I could honor longtime Chicago 70s fictitious promoter. It was actually Dick the Bruiser and Vern Gagne's. They were doing the booking, but Bob Luce wanted to honor him. And to see how much Dave Prazak has grown. A couple of things. Back to the film quickly. Do we know? If you look at the Von Erich film and then this one, there's all of the tragedy that maybe drew in a lot of audience. It was, how mind blowing. Son after son died, even though they melded Chris and Mike Atkinson. But in this film, maybe if word gets out, oh wow, you got to see this film simply because of what this husband Billy Wolf does to all of these females. Is Billy Wolf? I know he's in the film, but does anybody know if they're showing some of the more negative stuff that he did, some of the salacious stuff? That might bring in some audience and at least turn them on to reading Jeff Lean's book, if nothing else. I mean, Dan, do you know? We don't know unless we see it.
I don't know how it's presented, but I can't imagine you could do a movie with Billy Wolf as a character without including some of that. So yeah, I mean that's what he was his kind of sadism and misogyny. Really, we're kind of right below the surface. You have to scratch too hard to find it. So I'm sure it's in there, but I don't know how he's represented or presented in the movie.
There's something cool because her dojo's right in the city that I'm at, and I talk to her frequently. I go to her press conferences. Chris Cyborg, who is like arguably the greatest, a little different weight class. She never got to meet Ronda, but second in name value, just a huge deal. She has already told me she's seriously considering, along with her husband, pro wrestling once she's finally done. She bops around. She's worked for every promotion, even for Dana. So that's kind of a world flash there. And you mentioned a good friend of mine who I was covering when she was just a cheerleader for one of the Ballard twins for Rick Bassman's UPW, and cheerleader Melissa Anderson, who I've known forever. She told me, and I was there shooting it. It was at a house show for APW. She said, I did my damnedest to carry Lacey Von Erich to a watchable match, and she could not. And here's someone, in my opinion, who should be at NXT or at developmental training, along with Sarah D'Amato. I wish nothing but the best, because those two were my favorite American gaijin wrestlers, outside of the Japanese.
One quick point on Melissa, and I know that we've probably got a lot to discuss here, but at one of those Shimmer shows, she was going to wrestle Miss Natural. It's Ken Patera's daughter, I believe. And they had a match lined up, and, it was a mid-card match for that show. And you're backstage, and you see the girls kind of in their groups. They're going through their spots, going through the matches, as people, whatever you see backstage before a wrestling show. And I happened to mention to Melissa as we were talking, we were just killing time. I said, I would love to see two people, it's a long weekend, whatever. Just go out, call it in the ring and see what happens. Instead of, because especially with the younger kids coming up, if they miss a spot, you can see their eyes get real big, the deer in the headlights. What do we do? And Melissa kind of said, yeah, that would be nice. And she ended up going over to Miss Natural, and I didn't know this until afterwards, saying, you know what? Let's call it in the ring. Let's just completely call it in the ring. We'll go 8 minutes, just do it, which nobody was really doing because this was, and for Shimmer, because everything was going on DVDs and they had this fan base and everyone really wanted to have all their stuff down for these shows because they had a big audience. And they went out there and they just called it. And it was just such a kind of beautiful thing to see because it felt different. It felt genuine, like the old-fashioned wrestling that we kind of grew up on, really. And Melissa was one of the very few females at that time who was comfortable doing that, saying, I'm going to take somebody and we're going to do it. And that's not to say that I'm not putting Miss Natural in the same boat as Lacey, but I'm just saying that Melissa was good enough where she could kind of cover for anybody and make it work. And when she had a competent and skilled opponent, they could just have classic matches.
And that says a lot because I don't think there's a lot of men that can do that in the business now.
Not anymore. No, not anymore.
And last thing I wanted to bring up, and I guess everybody can jump on this, but I want to get Dan's opinion on this first. I am 40, and I grew up watching women say the tail end of Wendy Richter, but I also was in the heart, at least, of seeing folks like Sherry Martel and Luna Vachon, who were two of the toughest cookies that you can think about, not just in female wrestling in general. Sherry and Luna were just top tier. I know a lot of guys I've spoken to that were scared of them if they got fired up. So how do you think those two in particular would be like in today's product, where there's a lot more athletic women?
Well, I mean, the easy thing to say is because they were so talented, I think that they would, excel. I don't know, though. I mean, to really give it some thought, I don't know if they could necessarily keep up with the athleticism that's required today. I mean, Sherry she could come off the top rope, but she wouldn't do the moves that Asuka would do or a lot of the girls would do now. But what I think that they realized was storytelling and the importance of character and getting something over, let alone selling, especially Sherry on the selling side. So I think that they could certainly fit in and stand out. I don't know if they'd be able to, go move for move at the pace that the girls go today, because that wasn't the world that they came up in. But I think that if you were to take the two of them in their prime and put them in a WWE or AEW environment, they'd still be able to get over and they'd still be able to stand out.
They could take an ODB and who's more in their sort of in ring as opposed to flying and doing the flippity stuff and really elevate her. Yeah, I particularly Luna, who both of them were total sweethearts away from all of this stuff.
Or Sherry could ground one of the high flyers and just kind of heel it up in an old-fashioned way and make that work. Yeah.
And it's not so much the flippy dippy shit. And sorry, Brian, I'll let you get in here. Yeah. But it's I'm thinking more of like Dan said, a storytelling aspect, but also wrestling in terms of, okay, we're going too fast, slow down, let things breathe, etc. Brian.
Sherry was a pure natural for the business. Not necessarily from the athletic side, but from the business side. She could sell and heal like anybody. Luna Vachon, on the other hand, you got to realize, is a Vachon. She was born into the business. She knew the business. She was raised around it. And when me and Dan were putting together the Wrestlers, everyone thinks we picked the people in it. It was the people that we interviewed would pick the people. That's, who the wrestlers, or other people in the business thought were the best. And we would compile the names of all these people mentioned and go over, should they be in? And I remember we were sitting in Virgil Avenue Tobacconist, having a cigar and a beer, and shocking with me and Dan, beer and cigars, right? And I said, what about Luna Vachon? And his eyes just got wide. And he's like, she's got to be in. She's got to be in. Because she was, doesn't matter, male, female, whatever, a wrestler's wrestler. She knew the business, the brains behind it, the selling, Dan explained it to me. you can't be raised a Vashon and not know the wrestling business.
Can I say something really quick, super fast, because I know
Please.
Dave's got to leave. When I first met Luna in Florida and I presented her with photos I'd taken around 72, 73 of Vivian, her Aunt Vivian,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if I told you this, she just totally broke down. She loved and idolized Vivian, who was an amazing person. I hope people, maybe they see this film and they go see Vivian or Wrestling Queen, that movie from about 74. You know, we had that period when Vern Gagne's the wrestler, I Like to Hurt People, and then the Wrestling Queen, that particular movie came out.
That was the Henry Winkler movie came out around then too, right? Was
The
that
one and
that time
only.
period? Yeah, the one and only.
That came out right after Rocky and before Paradise Alley.
There you
the
go. Okay.
Gorgeous George thing, which I wish a lot of folks don't know. In the hip toss segment, there's Chavo, there's Piper. It's sort of like in Paradise Alley. A lot of folks don't know Don Leo Jonathan was one of those in there that was amazing. Very quickly, I don't know if Dan knows this one. It was when we had Betty Nicolai and Titi Paris from France, a French female wrestler, and I think she worked in Australia. They both said they did the work for years to get the women's ban in New York overturned. I think it was 72 or late 71. But because Lillian Moolah, who didn't lift a finger to do any of that, work with commissions and all that stuff, was friends with Vince Sr., she was credited. So Dan, I don't know if you got to talk to Betty's still alive. She had a shoot on our underneath Fred Blassie against John Tolis at the outdoor LA Coliseum show in August 71. It ended up being a shoot because she and Moolah had such heat. And that was at the same time this was going on. But had you heard that, Dan, that Moolah really did nothing, but she got all the credit when...
Yeah. We have a chapter in the book. I think that my co-author on Sisterhood, Pat LaPrade, I think he had spoken to Betty in the chapter on her, but we also have a chapter on TD and her contribution. I mean, yeah, she spent her life fighting for getting women's wrestling allowed, legalized, and mandated. And like you said, it's Moolah was the right person in the right place to take advantage of it. And, ironically, TD, I don't think that she ever... I can't recall. I do know it's in the book. Forgive me, it's on the top of my head.
Yeah,
I don't know if she ever
in
ended up wrestling ever in New York State after it was regulated, but she did fight for years and years to get it there.
So amazing
Brian.
that were not booked by Moolah, the Rachel Dubois and the Heather Feathers and all of those folks, Kay Noble, and there were quite a few others. And, they did their best to get around the country. They were amazing. Betty in particular, just head and shoulders. And her match underneath the big outdoor thing with Sheik against Bobo was the co-main, and Shibuya and Sato against Gordon Goliath. She was our California women's champion, the title that Mike LaBelle kind of handed her. There was no tourney. But she put it up against Moolah, and there was like no finish to that outdoor Coliseum match. It was just insane. And they had heat, I think, their entire careers, until both. Well, Betty's still alive, but she's married to longtime Baba #2 and the guy who was in WWF quite a bit, Akio Sato.
Brian, did you want to bring something up there before I put a bow on things?
No, other than, two things. That Wrestling Queen, the Vashon movie, is available for free on YouTube, as is the one and only, the Henry Winkler wrestling movie, which I highly recommend. I just want to tell Dan, you better get a hold of me soon. We got to get together. And everybody, once you see this movie, I'm sure you're going to want to go out and buy Sisterhood of the Squared Circle. It's
ECW Press.
ECW Press. As a fan, as a historian, not of wrestling, but of just the world, it's a fascinating read. It's an incredible book. And Dan, you should be proud of everything you've done for the women's side of the business, because I know they're all proud of you. They cannot speak highly enough of you, every single one of them. So
thank you, Brian. I appreciate that.
You did a terrific book with Hollywood. I got that book as well. It's great. I wasn't a fan of Glow. I shot a couple of the first TV tapings. That's where I met she and Cheryl, her best friend Cheryl. And it's a great book as well. So if you like Jeff Lean's book, or you're turned on because of the current movie, you got to get Danny's book, or the two of you guys, because that's the Bible on female wrestling, no question.
Dan, what's next for you? What are you working on?
Actually, it's good that you mentioned it. I'm working with Scott Teal right now with Crowbar Press. I think everybody here knows Scott. I have a book coming out with him next month. At the end of April, it should be available. It's currently done. It's going through layout. I was going back and forth with cover designs with him earlier today, so hopefully we'll have that all together. But it is a biography of a men's pro wrestler, Ed Don George, who was a pro wrestler in the 1930s, former Olympian, three-time world champion in the 1930s, left wrestling when he enlisted in the military after Pearl Harbor, served in the Navy, helped the Navy rewrite their hand-to-hand combat guide, got out, became a promoter, and had this incredible, fascinating life, promoting pro wrestling in Western New York, as well as in Cuba. He was promoting in Cuba when Fidel Castro came in. So really interesting guy, and there's just not a lot out there. You know, you think that during the 1930s, during the Great Depression, he was out there wrestling guys like Jim Londos and Dan O'Mahony, and drawing 25, 30, 35,000 people in Los Angeles and in Boston for some of his shows. And he's kind of been one of these overlooked historical figures. So I'm hoping to give Ed Don George his due.
What happened to the book I nagged you, the Monsoon book? Is that still upcoming?
The Monsoon book, yeah, that is the one that is being done by
Brian Solomon.
That's it, Brian Solomon. I blanked his name. I had his face, but I blanked his name.
Oh, Solomon. Okay, all right.
Yes.
But Ed Don George, that's going to be. It's fantastic. Now we've got a book on Londos. Now we're going to have. This is the first time hearing it, so I'm really excited about Ed Don George. I've
been avoiding buying the Londos book just because I don't want it to influence me as I'm finishing up Ed Don. But the moment Ed Don is out in print, I'm getting Londos. They're going to be my bookends.
So on that note, I'm going to have you back to talk about the new book because
absolutely,
Brian would know some of the gentlemen. I've introduced him to some of the gentlemen who specialize in hand-to-hand combat, and I go to a lot of their schools and stuff on the West Coast when I can. So Dan and the other two gentlemen, Mike and Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, and guys, it's been great talking to all the three of you. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, this is Hollywood from the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.